The object looks like it wants to be read. A clay disc. Two sides. A spiral of symbols pressed into the surface. Human figures, birds, plants, tolls, shields, shapes that feel almost familiar, close enough to language to tempt you, far enough away to refuse you. That is the power of the Phaistos Disc. It does not look random. It does not look decorative. It looks like someone had something to say. And for more than a century, people have been trying to hear it. The problem is not that nobody has offered a translation. The problem is that too many people have, and almost none can be proven. The Phaistos Disc was discovered in 1908 by the Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier during excavations at the Minoan palace of Phaistos on Crete. Today it is held by the Heraklion Archaeological Museum. The object itself is small enough to feel intimate, roughly hand-sized, made of fired clay, and marked on both sides, but its small size is deceptive, because the disc contains one of the most famous undeciphered inscriptions in archaeology. The signs are arranged in a spiral. They are divided into groups by lines, and unlike writing scratched by hand, many of the signs appear to have been impressed into the clay with stamps before firing. That detail changes everything. Stamped signs suggest planning, repeatability, a system, maybe even something like printing, though we have to be careful with that word. Using stamps once is not the same as inventing a printing culture, but it does mean the maker was not casually scratching symbols into wet clay. This was deliberate. The mystery begins with that deliberateness. The Phaistos Disc is maddening because it sits in the dangerous zone between image and text. If the marks looked like random decoration, the mystery would be smaller. If the script were known, the mystery might be solved. But the signs feel organized. They repeat. They form groups. They move in a clear spiral. They look like a system with rules, and the human brain is built to chase rules. We see repetition and want grammar. We see separation marks and want words. We see a spiral and want reading direction. We see pictorial signs and want meaning. That is why the disc has generated so many proposed readings. A prayer, a hymn, a military text, a calendar, a game, a ritual object, a story, a charm, a message from one language or another. The problem is that a theory can feel persuasive when it only has to explain one object. That is the trap. The disc contains hundreds of sign impressions, usually counted at around 241 or 242 total occurrences, depending on how damaged signs are handled. There are about 45 distinct sign types. Those numbers are enough to invite analysis, but not enough to force a solution. That is a cruel balance. If there were only 10 marks, most people would not expect decipherment. If there were 10,000 lines, patterns might become testable. But the Phaistos Disc gives us just enough to dream, not enough to prove. The groups divided by lines are often called words, but even that word needs quotation marks. They may be words, they may be names, they may be phrases, they may be units in a non-linguistic system, they may be something we do not have a category for. The disc keeps offering familiar handles, then pulling them away. The central problem is simple. There is no clear second copy. That one fact changes everything. When scholars decipher scripts, they usually need comparison. Many texts, repeated phrases, known names, bilingual inscriptions, administrative patterns, connections to related scripts. The famous decipherment of Linear B worked because scholars had many tablets and enough patterns to test the language behind them. The Phaistos Disc does not give us that kind of corpus. It gives us one spectacular object. One object can suggest a system. But one object struggles to prove a system. That is why proposed translations keep failing to convince. They can explain the disc after choosing assumptions, but they cannot demonstrate that those assumptions are correct. A real decipherment should do more than make one text sound meaningful. It should predict, it should travel, it should work when tested against new material. The Phaistos Disc has almost nowhere for a translation to travel. Every translation begins with choices. What direction is it read? What language is underneath? Are the signs syllables, words, ideas, sounds, mixed symbols? Does a figure of a head represent a person, a sound, a title, a god, a place, or something else entirely? Once those choices are made, the disc can begin to speak. But the danger is that it may only be speaking the translator's assumptions back to them. That is why so many translations sound confident. Confidence is easy when the test is weak. A person can decide the disc is Greek, or Egyptian, or Semitic, or Anatolian, or Minoan, or a hymn, or a board game, or a prayer. Then they can make the signs fit, but fitting is not deciphering. A costume can fit a mannequin. That does not make the mannequin alive. The disc may be writing. That is the most natural assumption. But even this should be handled carefully. The signs are organized enough to suggest a communication system. The number of distinct signs has often led people to compare it with syllabic scripts. But the disc has not been securely connected to a larger archive. It does not behave like a known administrative system. It does not come with parallel texts. It has no agreed language, and its pictorial signs can mislead modern viewers. When a symbol looks like a shield, that does not mean it says shield. When a figure looks like a person, it does not necessarily mean person. Writing systems often use signs whose original pictures have drifted far away from their later sound values, so the disc may look more transparent than it is. That is part of its cruelty. It gives us pictures, but not a dictionary. The disc did not come from nowhere. It comes from Crete, from the world we call Minoan, a world of palaces, trade, storage rooms, seals, frescoes, ritual spaces, and scripts that still challenge scholars. That context matters. Crete was not culturally empty. It was not a place where one strange object appeared in isolation from complexity. There were administrative systems, there were symbols, there were goods moving through palatial centers, there were other scripts, including linear A, which itself remains undeciphered. So the Phaistos Disc belongs near a world of writing and record-keeping. But near is not the same as solved. That is the frustrating part. If the disc were simply another linear A tablet, it would still be difficult, but at least it would belong to a larger family. Instead, it looks related enough to the problem of writing to tempt us, but different enough to resist easy placement. It is like finding one page from a book in a library where all the other books are written in different scripts. The building tells you literacy mattered. The page still refuses to read itself. The stamped nature of the signs is one of the most fascinating parts of the disc. Each sign was not drawn freely in the moment. The maker appears to have used stamps pressing individual symbols into wet clay. That means tools existed for producing those signs, and if tools existed, the next question becomes obvious. Why do we not have more stamped texts like it? Were the stamps used for other objects that have not survived? Was this a one-off ritual object? Was it imported? Was it part of a practice that disappeared almost completely? Or are we missing evidence because archaeology preserves only a tiny fraction of what once existed? The stamp signs make the disc feel systematic, but they also deepen the mystery. A stamp is an investment. Someone made a tool to repeat a sign. That implies the sign mattered beyond one casual mark. Yet the repeated system survives, so far, mainly on this one disc. That is why the object feels both intentional and stranded. It looks like part of something larger. We just do not have the larger thing. Because the Phaistos Disc is so unusual, some have questioned whether it could be a forgery. That suspicion should not be exaggerated. The disc is generally treated as authentic in mainstream discussion. But the very fact that forgery has been raised tells us something important. Unique artifacts carry unique risk. When an object has no close parallel, every interpretation becomes more fragile. If it is authentic, it is extraordinary. If it were not, it would be one of the most successful archaeological provocations ever created. But we do not need to turn the episode into a forgery trial. The more useful point is that uniqueness makes evidence harder to stabilize. A single object can become famous faster than it can be understood. That is exactly what happened here. The disc became an icon of mystery, but icons are dangerous. They make us want answers before the evidence is ready. The Phaistos Disc survives as a mystery because it is balanced almost perfectly, too organized to dismiss, too isolated to solve, too visual to ignore, too silent to trust. It belongs to the Bronze Age world of Crete, near a landscape of palaces, scripts, trade, ritual, and administration. But context is not a key. It tells us where to stand while looking at the object. It does not tell us what the signs say. That is why the disc is so durable as a mystery. Every decade can bring a new proposed reading. Every proposed reading can attract attention, but without external confirmation, the center does not hold. The disc remains itself, a spiral of possible meaning, a message with no agreed voice. The most important discovery would not be a genius translation, it would be another text, a second disc, a tablet using the same signs, a seal, a label, a bilingual inscription, a longer archive. Even a short inscription with a known context could change everything. If the same signs appeared on another object in a clearer archaeological setting, scholars could begin comparing. Do signs repeat in the same groups? Do endings change? Do names recur? Do signs match places, titles, offerings, gods, goods, or numbers? Decipherment needs pressure. One object lets theories float. Many objects force theories to land. Until that happens, the best answer remains disciplined uncertainty. Not because scholars have failed to imagine, because imagination is not enough. The Phaistos Disc may contain a message. That is the painful part. Someone may have pressed these signs into clay with a purpose that was obvious to them. Maybe it was sung, maybe recited, maybe carried, maybe displayed, maybe buried, maybe used once and forgotten. To its maker, it may not have been mysterious at all. To us, it is almost the perfect unsolved object, not empty, not random, not silent in appearance, but silent in meaning. The Phaistos Disc teaches that not every message survives as a message. Sometimes the object survives. The system vanishes, and the future is left holding a beautiful sentence with no language around it. If you want another object where one missing context changes everything, watch the Roman dodecahedron next. The disc looks readable. The dodecahedron looks useful. Both become mysteries because looking is not the same as understanding.